Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Deep Thoughts. Today's sort of a cold day, so I've got a couple jackets on here. We'll see if I can't peel one of these things off here soon. The skies are completely full of man-made cloud systems. Call them what you want. They're not natural, and they shouldn't be up there. But today's subject, as you can tell, was going to be about the promise of aliens. Or the alien promise. That's probably what I'll call it. You know, I did an episode on Do Aliens Exist, and the main thrust of that episode is all about, you know, the assertions that aliens exist, the things that we have seen in terms of observing the skies and having various maybe interpersonal experiences with aliens, and sort of the very specific crashes like Roswell and that kind of thing, and then talking about how people believe that we've reverse engineered technology from alien spaceships simply because they're almost entirely devoid of science and the history of science, and so for them it's more alluring to have, you know, it come from, you know, it's like they don't know anything about the technology or the steps that it would have led up to discover some technology, and so it's easier for them just to say it came from alien spaceships, and boy, doesn't that sound amazing. But I'm going to get at something I haven't heard discussed in any specific detail, which is sort of the alien promise. We are lured to the notion of aliens, meaning any living dominant species in the galaxy/universe that has access to us on a routine basis, that has intense technology. Because I think that man is looking for a shortcut to fixing our own planet. And what do I mean by that? If you're in a first world country that's very balanced and your history is that you fought your ass off, your forefathers and what have you fought your ass off to have the amount of freedom that you have, you know that when someone immigrates to your country who is essentially a deserter out of their country, right? Their country sucks. Their intellect allowed their country to suck. They don't have the fortification in their soul to fight for what's theirs. And so they just leave. They're just an absolute fucking deserter out of their country. And they come to your country and they want your social programs and your hard work and toil and sweat and tears to pay their way. And of course you get these otherwise goth or emo kids who no longer have a fashion statement to make. They jump into socialism and they try to guilt trip you for hanging on to the structural integrity of the freedoms that give that spoon, you know, that silver spoon kid the privilege to be so deluded. It's this weird ancestral loop of insanity, right? But I want to say, and the reason why I put that so poignantly and potentially even offensively is that the promise of an alien coming down to Earth, the entire subconscious promise of proving that aliens exist and that we aren't the only ones in the universe, and that potentially they have this amazing technology base that's way beyond our own, and that somehow we can convince them by behaving like the dog sitting, you know, begging for food at the kitchen table, that we're going to be able to get a smidgen of that technology, or all that technology, that they're going to want us to be instantaneous peers with them, and supposedly we can just evade making this world better. We get to escape like the deserting Homo sapiens on our own planet to perhaps another planet. Maybe we never gain the accountability of actually getting rid of tyrannical bank families and monarch families. Instead of removing them out of their homes and putting them in dungeons and taking all their DNA and putting them in the dungeon and saying, look, I'm really sorry, but you all been indoctrinated against humanity, and we're no longer in that gear anymore. Bankers, no longer do we live for your fiat currency and your fake derivative bubbles. You're going into this bunker. You will not see another human being, and you will not see each other. You will just rot in this fucking hole. Instead of us having the courage to do that, and any other associated politician or military head who is serving those scumbags. Instead of having the courage to do that, we went off and we get excited about cheating. Cheating on the test of life by usurping and stealing the test answers from aliens. I'm going to wager to you that the more that we cower down to the systems, to the catchphrases that make the world suck, the more that we have fanboy clubs out there that sit on top of products, and as the products deteriorate and become more horrible over time, the fanboys are always there to make sure that horrible evolutions or lack of evolutions in technology, or what we're all supposed to be politically correct about complimenting. You can never say, well, didn't this product used to be great? Didn't it used to be innovative? Wasn't it amazing to watch a stage presentation from this company, to see something amazing happen? And the fanboys come in with their soy boy political correctness. How dare you say anything bad about that? I'm offended. Give me a free iPod. We're not dealing with any of the bad stuff on our planet, except for, the MK Ultra clan, right? And everyone else is into this sort of truth movement thing. Regardless if we're delusional or not, our intent is to fix everything. But the alien promise is fascinating. What we marvel at about aliens is almost unanimously in the category of things they can do that we can't do. That's usually how we marvel at aliens. We don't hear too many stories about beating an alien at Monopoly, beating an alien in a sprint on a track. We never hear about the stories of just aliens being frail beings. I mean, you could technically say there's plenty of stories of aliens that are delicate physical beings. I don't know why that would be the case, but they're always the aliens that can do magical things. And the stories, again, they always seem to evolve in proportion to society's imagination to create fiction of the same kind. If man is able to take a photograph, then all of a sudden a man is able to take a photograph of an alien disc thing in the sky, UFO. If man figures out how to cross-process photos in a lab and start doing multiple negatives into a single exposure, well, then all of a sudden we start having aliens show up in crowds and audiences, right? Once we had radar, well, supposedly we shot UFOs out of the skies with radar. It's just a one-to-one correlation. This amazing... as soon as we can think it up, boom, it starts happening to us. And hell, maybe that's the way it works. I'm not sure. I wrote an article a long time ago on onepagenews.com. I think it's called The UFO Myth. And it's about the idea that regardless if UFOs truly exist, and, you get in trouble when you talk about UFOs not existing simply because you're potentially saying, if you don't take the time out of your statement to clarify, which I'm going to do right now, at no point does, at least from my perspective, as anyone saying that extraterrestrial life doesn't exist in the universe. They're simply saying that they don't believe that there's any credible evidence that a UFO has ever landed on planet Earth or been captured or been photographed. Now, I actually think that there's plenty of evidence that things have been photographed, honestly. What I don't personally believe is that the United States of America is somehow this exclusive force on planet Earth who happens to have, outside of Joseph Goebbels, the most sophisticated and refined public relations machine known as television in Hollywood. We mastered and still are the number one masters of fakery within those mediums. And there's nothing wrong with that, because we're telling fictional stories on TV and we're making amazing movies that inspire people and just touch our hearts and that kind of thing, make us laugh, make us cry. There's nothing wrong with that. But when that is used to create potentially disinformation campaigns, it gets super duper dangerous, I think. So let me give you an example. And I need you to go with me on this. Role play with me for a split second. I want you to take this frame in the YouTube or in your audio listening, and I want you to split the frame of your vision of me or your listening realm of me into two. There's a left side of the screen and a right side of the screen. On the left side of the screen, I want you to keep it exactly the way you perceive me right now. A random guy in the world recording himself in his backyard on occasion, making these videos or audio podcasts that you listen to. And believe me, I appreciate everyone listening. Now, I want you to take it on the right side of the screen, the other side of the screen, and I want you to imagine that what I'm really doing here is something entirely different than what you think I'm doing. I'm actually a descendant of an alien race that is the engineers of the universe. My job is to socially enhance the consciousness of mankind. My life is on average 100 years if I don't get hit by a bus. I age very slowly. I am fully immune from toxins that you're going to die from, which is why I can smoke a cigar, and I don't have to worry about it. There have been plenty of others on this planet of the same exact species. And the voice you're hearing, although Homo sapien and made of this flesh and blood, is actually derived from outside this planet. So the whole time you've been listening to me in all these videos and all these audio tracks, I'm not just your average guy. And I'm not trying to be special. I'm just an engineer that works with a bunch of other engineers. If you want to call us sort of a secret society of individuals helping the universe, then that's what you should call us, because that's our intent. Now, let's push stop on this two-column view of what's really going on. In the first column, I'm a normal dude. I'm flawed. I'm like you. Just as flawed as anybody else on planet Earth. In the second column, the second example, I made myself really special. And all of a sudden, maybe something profound fell through your heart if you're able to role play that with me for a split second. Oh my God, really? You're that guy? In one realm, a story made me special. Maybe it correlated with some of the truth of what I've been trying to do here. I really have been making deep thoughts to try and enhance society. Okay. What if the United States government was just like any other government? Well, then you would view them with a certain level of power and ability, because they're just like everyone else. Everyone gets up, puts two pant legs on in the morning, goes to work, and tries to keep world peace, tries to protect their country, tries to live by the principles of the rule structure that they've agreed on, which in our particular case in America is the Constitution. But now let's overlay a story out of, I believe, 1947, right? A spaceship crashes in Roswell, New Mexico, and it's recovered by the United States military. It is discovered by a farmer who supposedly found plenty of evidence that this was a flying saucer, found the saucer itself, found the beings inside the saucer. About the time you start talking about what he found inside the saucer, the story deviates almost infinitely into every particular potential configuration of what could happen. All the aliens are dead. All the aliens are alive. Some of the aliens are dead. Some of the aliens are alive. Some of them are humanoid spliced beings with bizarre childlike bodies with big almond eyes. Some look like they're surgically altered almond eyes. Some look like they're biologically evolved almond eyes. The story goes insane. Where they took that saucer is all over the United States of America. Who was actually in charge is widely contested. The evidence that's brought back from the crash is almost entirely chaotic. You have pretty much a semi full of crap that people said that they brought back if you combine all the stories. People bringing little boxes back to their secretaries, or someone stealing bodies. One guy stole it and hid the bodies at a local mortuary. Another one took it to some freezer in some Air Force base. I mean, the story just deviates like crazy, which is where disinformation might have come in. If the story really occurred, they just disinfo the crap out of it. And because there's too many facts to sort out, you simply can't believe it anymore. Maybe that's the way it was. But let's take it up to the 90s with a guy named Bob Lazar, who I think in a credible way sort of proved that he worked for Area 51 and S4 as some physicist. Who knows what he was working on? But of course he says he was reverse engineering UFOs, and he said that there was at least 9 ships of completely different configurations, which that in itself should be ridiculous. No one buys the same car in space. Why wouldn't there be at least 2 ships that were identical? No, they're all different. They're all taken down by radars and missiles, and it's just like, come on. The attrition of traveling through space alone would utterly dwarf any radar wave you could send at a UFO. Like I said, my Do Aliens Exist video, the sun puts off more radiation than any radar. So if you can't travel through space, if a radar hits you that man makes, then you definitely can't travel through space as the universe emits radiation at you. In terms of concussive force and impact, well, you've got plenty of debris flying around the universe at ungodly amounts of velocity, and if you don't have a system to sense incoming debris and move out of the way, then there's no way that you could get here, for one thing. Even if it was interdimensional travel, the second you get here, you're going to be bombarded if you have any elevation in the sky whatsoever. There'd be crashed spaceships all over every planet everywhere, right? And of course, one would think, I think on average, that if you have the capability of folding space or infinite, light speed warp drives, that the easier thing to do would be to come up with the deflector array that's on the front of the Star Trek Enterprise that is supposedly knocking all the debris out of the way of the Enterprise, the NS-1, etc. But overlaying this story on top of humanity utterly and completely traumatizes those who are willing to believe. Let's say, for instance, that you actually did see something up in the sky, a UFO. And if nothing else, you're just seeing an unidentified object that seems to be flying in the sky because it's up in the air. Doesn't behave like a plane, like a jet. Perhaps it hovers, perhaps it moves in zigzaggy lines instantaneously. Doesn't seem to look like a plasma ball of energy. You've seen that theory, and it's not that. And it seems like maybe it's a cylinder in space with little windows down the side. Maybe it looks like it's miles wide. You're seeing something legit. So for the rest of your life, you believe that there are visitors from another place observing us, whether we be in a flat dome Earth or on some heliocentric ball or some combination of the two. You believe for the rest of your life, right? I told you that my grandmother, who was born in 1912, before 1920, saw cigars flying in the sky. And she told me one time, she said her and her sister used to see them, as in multiple instances of these flying in the Kansas plains. They just hovered really slowly, sort of like blimps, but they had smoke trails coming out the back, as if some weird propulsion system. Now, it seems illogical that a UFO would have a propulsion system with any form of pollution coming out of the back, but maybe that's not what she was seeing. Maybe it was the folding of space that just simply diverted photons and looked dark. Who knows, But my grandmother, when she told me, she had this look on her face that was the oddest look I think I've ever seen on her in my life. She's probably in her late 70s at the time. It was one of the times that we were together looking through photo albums and really getting the family history down on paper, the family tree. And she just sort of looked at me almost with young eyes. She's in her late 70s and she's always been the elder, and she always smiled and gave you big hugs and stuff. But at the same time, she's a very serious woman. And she looked at me almost like the little kid that may have told her parents such a thing. And it was like, I know you don't believe me, face, but I know this happened, face. It was a really strange thing. So you see this, you're changed for life, and now your government says, oh yeah, Not only have we seen that too, but we've captured one of them. Now, because of Bob Lazar, the rumor goes out they've captured 9 of them. We have to assume that if they ever captured 9, that unless the interstellar travelers of the world said, hey man, you might want to stop going to Earth because this country, America, seems to grab every one of us that lands, right? And again, they always seem to have mechanical problems. They always seem to crash all the time. It's like they're a bunch of rich sheik sons running around Beverly Hills in their UFOs, constantly running into mountains. But the government overlays on top of the whole consciousness of the planet Earth that they have the dibs on UFOs. And what does that do? That goes back to our little role-playing exercise. It makes them feel to us instantaneously sort of amazing and morbidly threatening. You know, it's not that they're reported as UFOs with big giant battleships on top, and you know they cruise through town. I mean, imagine the story, which has never happened. A UFO comes through town and, just like War of the Worlds, blasts up a city, destroys skyscrapers, kills men, women, and children running in the streets, and then it crashes because we stop it with a radar, and then the U.S. Army comes and grabs it, dismantles it. We even watch it on television being dismantled and concealed and hauled away. And then, 20 years later, the United States government says, okay, we have totally figured out all their weapon systems, their propulsion systems. Not only can we stop them ever returning, or if they do return, we can wipe them out really fast, but now we have that power structure over the citizens of the world. So all we're waiting for at that point is a corrupt leadership to come into place and try to pass draconian laws or draconian measures for the, your sheep, your mouth breathers who believe the Democrats and Republicans. Hey man, if you can believe in that crap, you can believe in anything. If you can believe in fictitious religions, you can believe in anything, Think about how deeply rooted a religion is for an individual. People die for religions. And what we're really dying for is a sense of freedom to believe what we want to believe. That's what we're really dying for. Some people fear, the mortality of their soul if they don't believe. But I think even your most staunch secular banker would fight and die if they were really pushed up against a tyrannical THX 1138 world. And they said, you can either fight now and maybe have this Daniel Boone, continent called North America that you can fight for and make it your own home, or you're going to put this white sheet on and you're never going to be able to make a choice again for the rest of your life. And if you go against the grain, these silver-faced, upright Boston Dynamics robots that are your police now are going to cattle prod you with electricity and beat the living crap out of you until you've submitted to their will. The will of the AI, the artificial intelligence that is now the world consciousness. Most people will fight. Because you're going to be, not fighting means you're going to have a horrible existence. No matter how you slice it, no matter how you try to comply, right? There's a great series, a really tiny series. I believe it was on HBO Go. It's called Dark Mirror. And I forget the name of the episode, but there's a great episode where it's a British-made miniseries. It's got a fixed budget, you can tell, but it's not bad. It's not bad. But one of the shows is about this guy who has to wake up every day and he has to go to this exercise bike every single day because he's pedaling this bike to create credits to manage his life with. And they're constantly surrounded by advertising. And the way that they have to, the only way they can get the advertising out of their life, and the cube that they live in is actually a cube, excuse me, at the door. There's all television screens. And it's loud, and it's got subwoofers, and it's very intense and penetrating in your world. So in order to get rid of these ads off their bodies, they have to pedal the bike for credits, and then they get to spend the credits to get rid of these ads. And so it's this perpetual motor of, and who knows if the bike actually generates power for the city or power for the world. You don't get to see the outside world ever. There's a little love story in there, and there's a little bit of an American Idol thing in there, which actually is the main thrust of the story. But just the foundational setting of this episode is very amazing. when it comes to this tyrannical world that the writer created, right? Now, every single, I want to say, just to button that up before I go back to the UFO thing, or the alien thing, watch all of the Dark Mirrors. Watch all of them, because they do it, it's almost like this forewarning of, if technology evolves unabated, these are the social ramifications of technology. And there's some that are very subtle, and there's some that's the more drastic one, like the one I mentioned. But when I hear people talk about religion, and they want to say that, Jesus Christ is Lord, and he's going to come back, and he's going to save everybody on Judgment Day, they get off for two reasons, right? They get off, first, I think, of the notion of they're right. And the ramifications of being right within the construct of religion is that they're going to watch all those who doubted them, right? The 99.9% of everyone else in the world, you pick any religion and it's 99% not the religion you're in. Because even if you're in Christianity, right, you're in the sect of Christianity that's going to be the one that's going to work. You're a Mormon and you're not a Catholic. You're a Catholic and not a Mormon. So everyone else is going to die and you're going to be okay. So it's a sort of utopian restoration of the world, in that your little tribe's going to be the only one left. So first, they're going to bask in your reality TV slaying of all man. They're going to witness the utter demons pulling apart humans who didn't... who never really committed any major sin in the world, right? They were good people their whole life, but they simply didn't go to church, and they simply didn't get baptized for the 90th time. And, these horrid, wretched humans are going to sit there and bask in the punishment of all the people. And that's the first thing they're going to get off on. The second thing they're going to get off on is that they're picked, and they're going to go to this place called heaven. And of course, heaven is this perpetual state of unchange. And, it only appeals to those who are utter mouth breathers, who are utter uneducated folks that have never thought out what heaven would actually be like, And the only caveat I've ever heard of that is, well, you don't know how perpetual happiness could actually exist because you'd never experienced it, and I will be able to eat vanilla ice cream my whole life, and it will always taste good the millionth time I eat it and the first time I eat it. And there's infinite flavors of ice cream in heaven, blah, blah, blah. I can tell you right now, you would cease to become anything productive in the universe. You would be this consumer consumption person that you're essentially going to the mall every day of your life in heaven. You would cease to have any relevance to the universe itself. Now, believing in reincarnation myself, I do hope that there's a little break after this, that we get to kind of relax. It may not be necessary because we may not care anymore, but I do hope that there's a little bit of a couple 100-year reprieve. And maybe I choose when I want to go back. But I'd rather have that be almost my choice. If I want to spend 1,000 years researching within the confines of this sort of, I know I have a mortal coil now, and if I were to pass on and reincarnation were to be real, then obviously I wouldn't have that constraint on my system, but I wouldn't want all the answers just shoved into my brain. I might want some answers quickly. But I think that because I'm an adventurous person and I don't like cheating on video games, I don't like cheating on anything, because I know that regardless of how hard it is to accomplish something, I know that feeling when I finally figured out myself. It's a joyous feeling that is probably the greatest gift that God can give us, is a lack of all knowledge, so we have choice, right? You've heard me mention this before. Now, that's just me using religion to illustrate to you the progression of thought, the progression of the future based on this ultimate reward handed down to us by a God. Whether it be Allah, God, Jesus, Buddha, whatever it is, right? Well, what's the difference between that and this secular view of aliens coming down and pretty much doing the same thing to us? And perhaps a lesser, more fanciful, dreamy way, right? Because heaven is we all have to agree if the concept of heaven is very pearly gates and somehow we can stand on clouds. I can't wait to see how that works. But in the end, we want to be leapfrogged ahead of our natural growth. We want to have people come in and just show us algorithms or formulas for curing cancer, which is, I'm going to loop back on cancer because it's an interesting one in relation to this pure cure. But, we want transparent aluminum. We want faster than light travel. We want to see our souls if we have them. I mean, just everything, right? We want them to give us the big, big rewards in life that they had to work really hard for, by the way. And we want to just steal it and have it be our ultimate achievement right away. Now, 2001: A Space Odyssey actually took this on a little bit and said that the black monolith that shows up is essentially a computer. If you read 3001, it was a computer put here by the aliens to essentially stimulate the growth of intelligent life. And I think that actually is a fairly decent approach. I think Arthur C. Clarke did a brilliant job with that. But take cancer, for instance. We say, we want the cure to cancer. Well, the reason why we have cancer is because of a bunch of man-made things, poisons in our food, poisons in our skies, from both the air that we breathe to the water we drink to the immense radioactive or radiation waves that come off like smart meters on my house, right? These smart meters are responsible for a massive surge in leukemia in the world. There's the Coit Tower in San Francisco that has a massive amount of leukemia at the base of the tower in both young people and old people. And as they recorded all of the cancer cases away from Coit Tower, the further away you live from that tower, the less leukemia we have reported. So if you live next to a cell phone tower or high power tension lines, you're going to get electromagnetic radiation poisoning into your body. This stuff rattles everything in your body. And remember, the DNA of a human being is an antenna. It's a beautiful electrical antenna. It's a beautiful antenna because it's based on the construction of the flow of electricity through the universe in general. Right? There's that beautiful animation. If, again, everything's heliocentric, you have a round sun moving through the galaxy. You have the Earth orbiting around that. And if you leave a trail, you've built essentially an antenna in space. And it's not trying to be an antenna in that particular case, but you're seeing the path of round moving objects moving through free space. So at the genetic level of mankind, we have the exact same construct in 50% of our chromosomes. The other 50% being protein patterns, which are the schematics that tell the DNA what to do. So curing cancer would be not just aliens coming down and saying, well, okay, we're going to jack up all your immune systems, take this serum every day. And you have to take the serum every day because you're constantly poisoning yourselves. The real cure to cancer is go back to the 1850s and eat normal organic food. Everything you've added since 1850, probably including the telegraph lines, you need to rethink how you make all these electrical objects. Stop putting the cell phones next to your head. Stop using electricity in the way that you are to stimulate the valence on or valence on a piece of conductive material so you have electricity moving things around. It's dangerous for your particular genome. Maybe they come in insects with really intense fortified DNA and they don't get modulated at all by electricity. And they're like, we don't even have a cure for cancer because we don't get it. Maybe as a result of creating UFOs and interdimensional travel, they simply figured out how to depollute their world to get rid of cancer. So they come to us and they say the cure to cancer is stop doing everything that you're doing. And could you imagine? It goes on the front page of the New York Times. Aliens bring cure to cancer. Stop fucking doing that. And then how many people in America are going to do it, or around the world? They're not going to do it. Is China going to close down all their factories all of a sudden, polluting all the water? Is India going to close down their factories and stop polluting all the water? No. It's the ecosystem by which they've built a crappy economy. And we buy their products, and we also engage in slave labor. I mean, think about what's going on in this world right now, that everyone appears from an outside vantage point. They look at us and they would say, all these human beings know that slavery is the way that things get done in their world, and they don't care. Are they really going to say, okay, we're going to send every human being on the planet Earth to class? When we are breeding our children to be utterly entitled millennium kids, to say you deserve a phone that costs $200 to $500, you deserve a phone plan that's $100 a month, you deserve a PlayStation that costs $500 a month, or $500, out the door, and then $75 per game. You're entitled to massive birthdays, massive Christmases. Every single holiday, everybody gets a bunch of free stuff. Halloween, where you deserve a $50 to $100 costume. Thanksgiving, you deserve a plane ticket to fly wherever your family is. I mean, it just goes on and on. Valentine's Day, just because you're a woman, the men have to fawn over you and spend a bunch of money. Otherwise, every other day of the year, they don't love you. Christmas, right? Massive consumerism. This is how we built our society. What do you think aliens would think about when they looked at Black Friday? How would they rationalize? You just tell me. How would they rationalize gifting mankind with anything? And that's the promise, right? That's the promise of the alien visitation and communication. The close encounters of the third and fourth kind, right? Then you have individuals on this planet that have used religion, a man-made construct based on some good intentions in some cases. They have gained amazing power over mankind. A preacher, a guru, for instance, they have all the answers for how man should behave philosophically. In case of Christian religions, there's always money involved, 10%, because God needs money, right? Again, like we always say on this particular show, the Vatican's never showed up to a natural disaster with aid. They never liquidate their trillions and trillions of dollars of stolen treasure in the basement in order to help people recover. But they're the hand of God in the eyes of many. Really? Yeah. You think God is a big treasure in space? You think that's how he rolls, right? I think it's interesting that Christians have so many ill opinions of Arabs and Muslims. A true devout Muslim doesn't wear jewelry. One of the reasons why we know the confession video of Osama bin Laden walking into the little apartment and sitting down and doing hand gestures about how he planned to take the towers down, One, the guy's not 6'5". Two, his face is completely different than Osama bin Laden's face. But again, just like white people think that black people all look the same, all right? Most of us who don't know Arab people think they all look the same. So they were just saying, he had a beard and a long nose, a little bit. But this guy was right-handed, and he had a wedding ring on. Well, Osama bin Laden was a devout Muslim, and in no other pictures did he ever use his right hand to do anything, and he never wore a wedding ring. Because it's against their religion to wear jewelry as a matter of vain expression to the outside world. It just gets crazy, right? So I'm going to tell you that if aliens were to show up and to watch us, to observe us as a bunch of bacteria in a petri dish, which that metaphor works great if you believe in a flat earth, but even if we're microbes crawling on this ball, I think that a couple things would be true. If you believe in aliens that come to us in flying saucers, one, they've never attempted to make direct communication with us in any way that engages the people of the world. They always seem to, go off to military-industrial complexes, which are responsible for murdering tons of people on this planet and lying about why we're supposed to be doing it. And that would mean that they endorse that sort of behavior. One might cite the prime directive out of Star Trek and saying no matter how bad it is, they're not going to interfere with us. Which would essentially, if you believe that, it's going to erase the alien promise. which is that they're going to somehow, at some point, as soon as we get Zephyr and Cochrane around to create the warp engine, they're going to show up. But since they teach us on this planet that pushing a single particle in the universe, the speed of light, is impossible, even though we can observe it all the time, going faster than the speed of light, we're never going to get there. It's like we're being prevented from even trying, if that was the case. But let's just say they were the other type of aliens, which is where your Planet X people come from, your Nibiru. We're trying to steal the resources off planet Earth because that's what we need to fix our atmosphere, right? They have interstellar travel. They have genetic splicing capabilities to create mankind from hominid. I'm just repeating their ridiculous story. But somehow they don't have the ability to terraform their own atmosphere. They don't have the ability to synthesize gold out of other atomic matter through fusion. All right, so you have these utter paradoxical claims that they have all this technology, but then no technology. That's that story of Planet X and Nibiru is just about as insane as, for me, as a Christian believing this second coming of Christ. One of the first coming of Christ ever happening, but then the second coming of Christ, that it's going to be this essentially brutal, wrathful God. You could take a little girl who's 12 years old who's never committed a big sin in her life, right? Never killed anybody, probably never even stole anything, never cheated on anybody, never coveted much in the world. Maybe the Barbie of the girl next to her. But she's going to get pulled apart by angels and demons and sent to the bowels of hell because she didn't take Jesus Christ into her soul and get baptized, right? If that sounds crazy, it should, because it is. But why is it that people believe in UFOs half the time don't have a sophisticated view on how the UFO, or how the occupants of a UFO, aliens, would ever approach Earth? And I think it's really based on the fact that most of the authorities in the UFO community, God bless their hearts, they're trying, they're nerds and sociopaths. They're not killer sociopaths. They're not people going to walk into your post office and kill everybody, but they're not really super social people. And so their philosophical engagement of existing is almost non-existent. So they don't think on psychological levels. They don't think on sociological levels. They simply think about, what hidden element in the universe can be stimulated by electricity and fold space or create a gravity well. I mean, that's what they're worried about, is all the technical ramifications of finding new elements in space, and maybe we can be as good as them, yada, yada, yada. But I've just, out of all of the UFO video things I've seen on the History Channel, Discovery Channel, all these official arteries of the world, nothing engages. I've never seen it. Maybe it exists. And I've seen tons of these things on the internet, the ones that I've never seen broadcast on television. They never engage the social predictions or social minimums that would occur if an alien race were to land on Earth and say, what are we going to do? How do you start fixing this thing? Most of you truthers, who are, I would say, either over 40 or you're ahead of the game, and that's a compliment to you. If you've ever stopped and contemplated, well, what if I gave you the reins of the world and I said, you are immortal, you are invincible, you never need to sleep, you'll never be hungry, and what you say goes. You don't get the reign over the universe or the galaxy or the solar system, but you have reign over this ball in space, the third rock from the sun, as they say. Any of you have contemplated what that responsibility would be. You have most likely been humbled within a fraction of a second, because you know that the minute you try to change everyone is the minute you either undo all the culture of this world, meaning you make everyone exactly the same. There is no more individual culture. The Mexicans are exactly like the Asians, exactly like the Anglo-Saxons. We lose all that culture, right? There's no more Africans or Aborigines. There's no more Russians, no more Indians. It's Native Americans even, that you start getting overwhelmed. So what super duper plan would these aliens have, provided I satisfy your first dream, which is that they land in Grand Central Station, You could land in inside of a building, but say Central Park, land in the halftime show of the Super Bowl, super televised FIFA game, the championship FIFA game, where the whole world's watching. They just land and come out just like day the Earth stood still. I think most of us would assume that because man is so primitive, and I don't say that with any superiority or happiness in my heart, if a UFO landed, you'd have probably 10% of the people in the crowd would be like Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters, staring up at this thing going, finally, oh my God, maybe they've got a plan. Maybe they've written it all out. Maybe they figured out what needs to occur. Maybe they've done this 100 times, if not 1,000,000 times before, and we are finally going to get this reprieve that man needs. As the Sumerians used to write, these beings came out of the hills and reset the world for them. Got rid of their corrupt leaders, and they picked new leaders and put new people in power, and then they would leave. And I think for those of you who believe in flat Earth, it'd be a really cool thing to open up a door in the dome, and this armada of owners come in. And in the terms of the Sumerian people, they would see these ships come over the mountaintops, right, and land and reset everything, and then fly back out through the door. And then a little petri dish that would be flat Earth. Wouldn't have to be flat to do this, but that would be a funny little storyline if you want to write a movie about that, right? But regardless, you'd have the group that's really happy that they're here. Then you'd have a group that is sort of your Nibiru believers, which is, oh my God, we're about to be made slaves. And then I think you would have probably 80% of the crowd running in absolute fear. If there was a guard sitting armed on the side of the sidelines of this appearance, and he had a pistol on his arm, and he's one of the 80%, he's going to pull his pistol out and start shooting every bullet he possibly can at that ship. Just out of pure panic. Because perhaps that individual's never thought about the concept, the true, what do we do now concept if aliens were to land. Now, there's this thing called the Disclosure Project run by Dr. Stephen Greer, who I think most of us believe works for the government. He's perpetuating this myth of, the government's in complete control of all the alien spaceships, and we have identified 27 species of aliens. Some that look like humanity, which is where my little role-playing exercise went with you guys. And that I think I've heard him say in so many terms that because we're not thinking about them landing and we're not having this social discourse about how we would handle that, right? You can go to Barnes and Noble and buy probably, without a joke, at least 12 books on what to do if a zombie apocalypse occurred. Some that are very serious and most of them that are comedy-based. But we've thought through that. But we haven't thought through, what do we do if aliens land? I mean, let's be serious. Let's sit down. I'm sure that there's think tanks all over the world that have done this, that have seriously done this. I'm willing to bet that every military Q clearance division in the military has sat down and actually thought this thing through. But to the degree it is not being trickled down to humanity through television and film, like if you want to indoctrinate human beings and teach them something that's going to help society get there, then this is what you would trickle down. If you were good human beings trying to help your people from a command structure at the top of the pyramid, whatever compartmental pyramid you're in, whether it be military, political, social, being your banker, your monarch, you'd want this kind of thing to be thought through and brought down to man. Because what if, let's just run this scenario down. There's one military complex in the world, I think there's many, that actually believe that intelligent life has visited this planet within a foreign vehicle. Okay? Now, we all know, in the MK Ultra crowd, that these individuals would never want to lose power. They would never want to lose the death grip they have on society. And so they would keep that, what they would do is fund every single program to make sure that aliens look like the well, any movie that, you know, is like Transformers or something where aliens are very formidable, scary, gonna do us wrong thing. They would pump billions of dollars into Planet X theories on the internet to make sure we believe that we are going to be instant slaves if these things show up. Essentially unpreparing man's mind for the communication with this culture. And then, if the aliens were to listen to our broadcasts, watch our shows on television, they would know that we're spending a tremendous amount of money to scare people away from them ever coming. That the amount of hysteria that was experienced during the broadcast of the War of the Worlds, with, I believe, Orson Welles leading the reenactment of this H.G. Wells book, would occur. But now what if we actually started engaging this in some social discourse on a really intelligent level and said, we're ready. We're ready to communicate. We're willing to understand that even if they did bring cures and technologies, that we would have to have them ebbed into society, that our scientists that would potentially not understand the technology that we would be given, we would have to actually go through some sort of slow evolution. Maybe it would take 100 years, maybe it would take 10 years. I don't know. You know, maybe there are some areas in technology that we've actually already discovered, but they've been hoarded. You know, a lot of us have done research in zero-point energy systems, and they're all over the place. The Patent Office of the United States of America won't let anyone file a zero-point energy system because they've been told it's impossible. The same game they played with the Wright brothers. Remember, the Wright brothers flew in 1903, but they didn't get their patent until 1907 when the military, the Navy, who was trying to create the Air Force, finally gave up because the Wright brothers split their team in half and went over to the World Fair in Paris and flew. And Paris said, okay, fine, we're giving these kids the patent, and the Air Force is going to be born in France, not in America. And they said, oh, wait. They actually flew here in 1903, and we just simply hadn't filed the paperwork properly. So it was a pending patent. They lied, and they gave it to the brothers over here. So this would have to be a world agenda to release all this information. But maybe, you know, again, there's scientists out there that are capable of coming up with this information. And the aliens show up and they simply take us that one extra notch. Or maybe the aliens come down and say to humanity in a way that can't be turned off, sort of some Stephen Moffat script, where it's like we're going to broadcast on every single television, every single speaker on planet Earth, every mechanism of communication. Maybe just broadcast a thought to the whole planet, whatever Babelfish language that everyone can understand, that we are here, we mean you no harm. You actually have individuals that are running the world poorly. The information that you need to get to the next level of humanity has actually already been discovered, but it's been hoarded. We're now going to broadcast into the mind of every single one of you this knowledge that you have already discovered. Boom. And then everybody understands zero-point energy. Everybody understands gravity. Everybody understands whether the world is flat or round, where we are, what we're here for. And then we get on with life. We get on with having children, being sensible about our population expansion. Adults understand that having more than 2 children is dangerous because you increase the world population. We really are at a blank slate when it comes to engaging alien life because we've never done it, at least that we know of, right? You know, there's the great Stanley Kubrick movie, Dr. Strangelove. And Dr. Strangelove is an unbelievable externalization of the way that the military-industrial complex thinks about all threats and all things, right? The general with all the bombs wants to use all the bombs. He wants to use everything. He's living in perpetual infantile fear of the dark, essentially, right? The unknown. And as soon as he identifies an unknown, it's kill, 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 kill. And it's fun to watch in these night vision precision bomb videos, right? The world's all strung out on liveleak.com videos of mass brainwashing. You know, that website is nothing more than an extension. It's founded by a bunch of military people, and it's nothing but an apparatus to show people propaganda. And sure, there's anti-propaganda in it, but never gets featured. The propaganda gets featured. Or the horrific visions of the world and people getting run over by trucks is in there, right? I think we need to think deeply, perhaps for the very first time, about how to engage aliens. And it needs to be an agenda that is welcoming, both to them, but to our fellow man. And I think that in this video alone, you've heard a bunch of logical strings that are attaching dots together that get us to a point where we realize, again, like the cure to cancer isn't just a serum that everybody drinks. Sure, maybe you find someone in stage 4 cancer that's about to die and the aliens come in and go, here, drink this. You're a product of your society. You're a product of manipulation and dangerous things that have been pitched to you as benign, and that's how you got cancer in the first place, which would be 100% the truth for sure. Unless, again, he's some uranium miner in Africa. But even at that point, someone should have told the person, hey, you touched this stuff. Madame Curie died of it. You will too. Right? Then you have the Twilight Zone, To Serve Man, right? To Serve Man is a brilliant episode about the aliens coming down and being very kind to humanity. This is where you get your sort of Dr. Strangelove general. I think it's Walter C. Scott. I think I played the guy. Well, this alien comes down. It's the guy who played Lurch and Jaws in all the Bond movies, who just recently passed away. And he plays this really tall alien that speaks with his mind. And he brings a book with him, with alien writing on the outside, a bunch of alien writing on the inside, and he happens to leave it behind. But he starts curing all these problems. He's just, the whole storyline is that these aliens arrive, and they all look exactly the same. They're all like these 7-foot-plus beings. And eventually the Army Corps of encryption folks, they start to decipher the book, and they say, the title, we think the title is To Serve Man. Oh my God, that's fantastic. And it goes on for another 15 minutes, and a bunch of the DNA from that particular Twilight Zone became the core DNA of Mars Attack, and a few other Twilight Zones were the third act of Mars Attack in your traditional 3-act screenplay format. But the guy in the Twilight Zone, he played a harmonica and started killing the aliens, whereas obviously it was playing Roy Orbison, I think, in Mars Attack. I could have that wrong, but some yodeling country singer in that particular frequency blew up the brains of people in Mars Attack, right? But in the end of this first Twilight Zone, they decipher the book, and it's a recipe book to serve man, and they're making all the crops better in the world, and so plumping up all of the human beings and then inviting them to visit the home world, where they're going to be fed the whole distance between Earth and this home world, and then they're going to be eaten at the other side. It's food. It's a food supply system, right? I'm thinking that the world's a pretty cool place. I mean, Earth is a gorgeous place. If we're on a heliocentric ball floating through space, then I would say that we're pretty damn vulnerable. And at that point, the heliocentric model really yields this idea that man could be taken over at any one point in time, because we're just a floating ball of resources in space. And, who knows if you can travel the galaxy if there's beautiful planets like Earth around. I forgot what the scientific term is for, they always say it on Star Trek, and the name escapes me right now, but there's a name for a planet like Earth. But what if we're rare? Then we could be just literally invaded, and there's a little virus dumped out on mankind, and we're all gone very quickly. It wouldn't need to be a slow death. It would just need to be sort of an extermination, some biological weapon that is dropped on mankind, a virus that eats us all up, a flu that eats us all up, and then we just peacefully die wherever we are. And they could do whatever they do to clean us up, maybe even let us rot out for 25 years, and then they come down and do what they need to do. There was a great special on Discovery where it was the planet Earth aged 10,000 years, and the skyscrapers fall into the ground. Metal is completely reconstituted into the Earth. So if you have 10,000 years of non-occupation of man, there are no more asphalt roads. There are no more artifacts of man's existence except big giant pyramids of rock. Big giant, potentially Stonehenges. 10,000 years is nothing, man. Right? We know that mankind existed 10,000 years ago. The Egyptians tracked their pharaohs back 36,000 years. That's Graham Hancock's entire contingency that the pyramids are inherited by the people that live there now. Obviously, they were that's an insult. They're obviously indigenous African black people that made those pyramids. Just look at the busts. Just look at King Tut's face, for God's sake. You're going to tell me that's an Arab person? Really? Have you ever seen the actress who plays Michonne on Walking Dead? Look at her genetics on her face. I believe it's in the movie Warriors, I believe it's the guy that plays Chief. He has very, very similar facial architecture as the woman who plays Michonne. I don't know all these actresses and actors' names, but the two of them are very, very similar, with a very pronounced lips and nose, and just very Egyptian-looking faces in terms of what matches the huge stone busts, right? Now, when you get to Nefertiti, you have a more Caucasian-looking, almost, you have more of an Arab-looking face, or what I would say is perhaps the Indians, the India Indians that maybe migrated out of Egypt, during the Mesopotamian Wars, maybe went up there and just moved to the right a little bit, to the east. But if they wanted this planet, they could just come get it very, very easily. So if they are visiting us, then we have to assume they've made this decision that we're not prepared for them. And again, if you take the top UFOologists, right, your top alien folks, your consultants that show up in all these internet videos and specials on TV, I think it's infinitesimal the amount of conversation that's in play to actually prepare society to engage them. Again, I think Dr. Stephen Greer is one of the only guys that I've heard ever really engage the idea that the reason why you're ever visited by them on a close encounter of the third kind, personally, is because your consciousness is open to them in a very peaceful way. Like, you're a very centered human being. And he says that, and even if this is not true, I think the sentiment is right on, which is what he says that, and Whitley Strieber says the same thing. Whitley Strieber's a good 2 decades ahead of Stephen Greer's initiative. But the notion, the storyline, the narrative is that if we sit and think very positive, warm thoughts towards these beings, that they are willing to visit us on occasion. And maybe they just simply look at a person's soul and they go, yeah, this person's ready. We can talk to them maybe once or twice. We don't want to give them empirical evidence that we exist because we're not ready to drop the hammer on this strategy just yet. But let's experiment from time to time and talk to some human beings and just see how it goes. This idea that we have to be captured in order to have the conversation, well, maybe it is a safer environment for us to be in their environment, right? There's no worry about a spaceship landing in the backyard being seen by people who aren't ready. Maybe it is more rural areas because, again, there's less eyeballs on you. But this idea that they would have to do anal probing and a bunch of other genetic invasive experiments is a little absurd, you could easily get cellular tissue off a human being at any depth without having to really open up the human body. And you certainly wouldn't have to go through the anal canal, for God's sakes, right? I think that, again, is one of these things of saying we're the military-industrial complex. We have the drop on all aliens. And if you happen to engage them by yourself, you're going to get sodomized by these things, And one thing I didn't mention in my Do Aliens Exist, but we mentioned on past episodes that we've retired, is that of our normal show, is that we have these mutilations of animals, and they tend to have their anal cavities removed and their mouth cavities removed. And there has been a consortium of scientists that have essentially asserted, and I think quite well, that when they did all the above-ground testing of nuclear weapons, whether or not the majority of them were TNT and a few of them were actually fission bombs, their there was definitely an increase in cancer in the United States of America because they happened to do it in the southwestern corner, which means all the fallout always went east over the rest of America. And proportionally speaking, the cancer rates in America were towards the east of these tests, right? They assert that that is a government agency that is going up to creatures and essentially taking out the soft tissue of eating and excreting. And the value of that is that if there was a bunch of radioactive isotopes, and you can just say, it wouldn't have to be nuclear testing, could be pollution in the sky, could be now Fukushima testing, but it's falling all over the world, and these animals are eating it up. And so if they want to test the absorption rate into the epidermis and all the soft tissue of the glandular system in the mouth, they would scoop out all that mouth tissue and then just run it through a laboratory and just see how many isotopes have been accumulated by a cow that sits and eats all day outside. And then to really measure the absorption, all right, you have the contact point, which is the mouth region. Then you have the digestive system through the cow. And you might just simply study maybe either the stool or the lower intestine to find out how much is left at the exit point of the cow. You know, it could be any animal on planet Earth. Now, what I don't understand is why the government wouldn't simply create their own cattle farms that aren't sold for meat and simply just grab it from strategic cattle ranches. I mean, you wouldn't even have to have more than maybe 5 cows that simply you just buy them off of farmers, and you say, okay, this was bought out of Salina, Kansas, and a couple out of the Panhandle region of America by Texas, Oklahoma border, and you just buy them and harvest them immediately. You wouldn't have to go onto a farmer's land and slaughter a random one, but maybe there's a reason for geographical accuracy to do that sort of harvesting to see how much radiation is being absorbed by the military exercises that happened in the past. But of course, this stuff fuels more fear that that's going to happen to humans, even though we haven't, to my knowledge, found a human being with his mouth cut out and his butt cut out. You know, but again, it's blamed on UFOs, and so you would think that that might be the case, unless somehow they have more sympathy for Homo sapiens versus the food that we eat. Now, the inverse could be true as well, and you might be saying, what are you talking about? Let's say that we have made contact with these beings. They do have a similar limitation in transporting a military to us. Perhaps for whatever reason, we do have their harmonica that can pop their brains, right? And they actually do have sort of a cattle mentality for us. They don't believe that we are superior to them. Therefore, even though we can think, and ergo zoom, we can, we think, therefore we are, sort of thing. They are protecting us from this, which is Whitley Strieber's entire assertion, was that they were coming to the United States of America especially, and by I guess it would be a global agenda as well, and they were stealing unborn fetuses out of women. So a lot of women that lost their babies and literally had no trace of the being of the fetus after a certain point, but also had this I was abducted by aliens sort of memory when they regressed them through hypnosis, that children were being spliced to see if they could do it. And then, of course, there was, some successes and some horrific experiences that would be implied. You take a sentient child, if you take a fetus, it wouldn't know any other world besides the world that it was born into. But perhaps if the experiment goes wrong, you're creating a being that is suffering, like Jekyll Island experiments where they're crossing spiders with goats, right? And so maybe their strategy at that point would be, these are threatening beings, and we need to make sure that everyone fears aliens, because if they ever did show up, we need to fight. But at that point, no one would know how to fight them. We have to assume, again, that if anyone wanted to do us harm, and they had the ability to fly through space, that genetic manipulation would be very simple. The Prometheus theory, they'd be able to undo our genetics, melt us down like salt on a snail. I tend to lean towards that. But again, this episode's about the false promise that if an alien race landed, that supposedly mankind would be rid of all burden. I think most truthers would just simply like to have them come and wipe out, just like the Sumerians said, wipe out the leadership structure, perhaps educate the world about their mechanisms of repression, such that we would never lose that, fiat currency systems that they use, the indoctrination of xenophobic wars, where we fear another faction, so we're automatically ready to kill a whole race. And then there's the other theory that we are an experiment. Flat or round, this world exists, and we appear to have extremely different Homo sapien species on this planet. And of course, there's a lot of white people that have a problem with them being derived from anything that they think is lesser than them, which is just so weird. We have Basques that are the residents of Spain that are live up in the hills, and they have a different brain configuration than we do, than the rest of us do. And some people might say, we've caught them. You have Nordic people that are just massive human beings. And geometrically speaking, they're very refined, And you have a lot of folks that have a massive geometry in their face. Very pronounced everything, pronounced eyebrow bone structure, like Neanderthal-looking, skeletons, skulls, and they have very pronounced nose, much larger noses than others of us, and they have bigger lips than us, and maybe their bodies are even more massive and intense, and they're able to survive the elements a lot better than we are. What I think is fascinating is that we look at Africans who still live in tribes, paint themselves, and they rate their mates on how high they can jump. They put giant bowls and discs in their ears and their lips, and they anoint themselves with the clays of the land, and they're able to hunt wild animals with spears. And mankind says, look how primitive they are. I feel so sorry for how primitive they are. And you think to yourself, all right, Mr. Super Sophisticated iPhone user, Mr. Entitled Millennial Child. Okay, so now the world resets. They turn off the power grid for a year and claim some CME disaster from the planet, from the sun. You no longer can just go down to the supermarket and buy whatever you need. You got to hunt. Who's primitive at that point? Who is going to vanish off the face of the planet within a few months, and who's going to continue living completely blissful within the paradigm that they have created for themselves to live within their means? Your primitive Africans, which a lot of white people want to believe they have no genetic relation to, which is just absurd. It's just an absolute lack of knowledge. It's a level of bigotry and ignorance that's just phenomenal, right? They'll be the dead ones. And your Africans will be just fine. As long as there's not a physical destruction of their region of the world whereby animals supposedly, cease to exist that they can hunt to eat, your Africans will be just fine. Your tribes in South America that have barely been discovered by man will be just fine, right? So that primitive code will keep man alive, and all whitey will be gone. Everybody who's sophisticated will be gone. To take it one step further, I'm going to just keep going on this particular video, because if you're interested in this, hopefully this is just amassing more fuel in your own mind to maybe to open the discussion up with your friends and family, or even just yourself. We don't really talk about, and it's been talked about, but it's not really lamented in any shape or again common conversation about aliens. That do they have sympathy, and do they have empathy? Do they have emotions? Because if they did, then that would be a major hurdle between their thinking and our thinking. Maybe, if they say, we will move in a second that we see that you actually have enough empathy to help each other out. And until then, you probably should go extinct because you're not like us. There are theories that take it to the utter extreme and the inverse, right? And if you have been on the internet for any length of time, will have heard about the interdimensional lizard theory, the reptilian theory. And for me, that whole theory is it's taking a bit of truth about those, or I should say perceived truth about those who run the world, and it mixes it with some good old Carl Sagan R-factor theories. And Carl Sagan did not invent the theory, but it was it's a multi-tiered theory. So let's go at it from a few different angles here. We're talking about the promise of aliens coming down. Well, I think we need to look at sort of what has been theorized out there and what is actually in some ways growing. I think that probably the reptilian theory slowed down quite a bit on the internet, but even if it's growing a little bit, it's worth talking about, because you might bump into someone who says, well, did you hear about the reptilians, man? They're everywhere. We know that when you mistreat a human being, or you reduce a human being to the strategic resources to exist, and especially if you took an iPhone user and you put them in the jungle with these tribes that have managed to survive beautifully and have love and compassion for each other, even though some of them in the world are still cannibalistic, a small portion of them, we know that a human being goes feral. And when you see either an abused child who's locked in a closet and fed every, minimum interval of food, and they have no social interaction with anyone, they don't know how to speak a language, and they're feral. And feral just means animalistic, instinctual. The genetic code in us that got us out of the caveman era is reborn in this being, and I believe it exists in all man, but we put social structures on top of it and comfort structures on top of it to dilute it into the sort of fight or flight survival mechanisms, and we barely ever engage it, hopefully, in our course of our life, right? Well, when they discovered the feral code of man still existing in man today through abuse or just mistakes, people stranded on islands and that kind of thing at early ages or whatever, like the Tarzan story, these scientists essentially said, oh my God, look, we still have that instinctual gene, and let's give it a name. So they went for the reptilian classification, and that's when they got this R factor, which is the reptilian index in the human consciousness that is this feral being. For those of us who might believe that we have a consciousness as a separate part of this mortal coil, some symbiotic relationship with a higher consciousness, the feral transformation of a human being is actually sort of a counter-argument to say if you did have some outside consciousness, then becoming a feral beast might be proof that there is no other consciousness unless the mind is healthy. I would just assert that perhaps it's because the vessel that is the symbiotic recipient of a consciousness might be so injured that the feral state is all that is able to transgress into this reality. That you can't have your sympathetic, empathetic paths really form. You're just looking at food to eat, water to drink, and you're going to want to screw every once in a while, right? Because your feral instinct to multiply comes into play. But I think that screwing is after survival, So because we think that it's pretty obvious that there are human beings in the world that don't wish most human beings well, they see themselves as sort of self-appointed authorities to the world, that they believe, look, these people are acting like sort of intellectual feral human beings. Yes, they party hardy and they wear goat heads to Rothschild birthday parties. In the end, the way they view the rest of the world is sort of barbarically primitive. They get no joy out of bringing happiness to other people, to spreading the knowledge of education, which makes people stop behaving like the ignorant masses that exist. The mob rule starts to calm down a little bit in the algorithm of man, right? So the real question comes up as to whether or not a alien society, through being very focused and very non-emotional, might evolve much faster than a being that has more emotion and more sympathy. Because let's face it, if you're 40 or over, and again, I'm saying that because that's sort of like a given age where some of the things I'm about to say I know have most likely occurred in your life. It doesn't mean, I'm saying that if you're younger, you're less than anyone who's over 40. I'm just saying that at 40, I know you've probably had this experience. Most of you are going to have had the experience I'm about to talk about here way before 40. But you know that you've been very focused in your life. In fact, I'll talk about my own experience just to put in perspective. At, say, 16 years old, a girl I was dating in high school, who's a sweet human being, I had turned into this jealous kid. It was just my first relationship. I loved this girl to death, and I thought she was everything in the world and more. And I thought that surely everyone else saw the same exact brilliance in her that I saw. And so in my mind, I thought, well, every guy wants to date my girlfriend. And I'm sure, I know that's true, but it was nothing I needed to be paranoid about. She had no intent of being disloyal to me in any way, shape, or form. But I had become sort of a tough guy to be with because I didn't want her to be with her friends, even her girlfriends. I wanted every second of her to myself. And it wasn't quite that obsessively absurd, but it was good enough to make her life not as fun as it would be if I'd been normal, right, and mature. And so eventually we broke up over some stupid stuff, of course. And within a couple of weeks, one of the guys that was like a mutual friend of mine and a former best friend of mine, he's a great guy to this day. But at the time, he started dating her within a couple weeks. In fact, I think within a couple days, they started dating and hooking up, as they say. I look back at that, I'm like, that's fine. I mean, that whole thing made complete sense. I was a jerk, and I had certainly spent more than a year being a jerk in these particular possessive realms. And so she moved on. When I realized that was happening, I'm in high school at the time, and I guess I probably was 17 by the time all this went down. I had managed to get my school grades really up. I mean, nearly a 4.0. And when this occurred, I stopped going to school on time because I had classes with both these people, right? And in fact, my first 2 classes at school was with both these people, the girl and the guy that were now dating. And, a week or 2 or a month before, some of these days, I was going to marry this woman. I was young, whatever. So it disturbed my reality. I didn't get the good grades that I was supposed to have. I didn't focus. I managed to stay focused at work, thank God. But it really ripped my heart out, my own fault. And I can tell you this definitely happened half a dozen times throughout my life when I was in a relationship and it didn't go well, or I'm working at a work that I love and something bad happens at work, the economy crashes or whatever. These trials of my life came in, and it made me, if I wasn't emotional, okay, I would have just stayed focused and continued working. If I hadn't been made to feel entitled in my own little ways throughout life, we all have different levels of entitlement, right? If I hadn't fallen victim to my own entitlement, I would have stayed more focused. And so the reason why I give you that example is you take an alien species that perhaps has very little empathy or sympathy. It is either you work or you don't work, and there's no reason not to work. They would technically, I think on paper, although they might not have a lot of musicals in their life and comedies, they would be way ahead of the rest of us in the universe. And I'll mention, I'm 3/4 German. And I know that the German society, when you go to Germany, they definitely are fun-loving, wonderful people just like everybody else, but they are definitely a little bit more myopic emotionally. And that's why even they'll say, you don't find a lot of German comedians in the world because their jokes are so brutal and so mathematical. They don't really have that curvy nature of what Americans have, which is the over-emotional race, But look at it. The Germans have been ahead of the entire planet when it comes to engineering of all kinds. They make the best of the best of the best, constantly. They are the society of Prussian education, which is the system that was designed to remove sort of this right brain functionality. They've been pushed into left brain functionality and serve the state and become sort of a robotic nation. Now, unlike China, who has the very same qualities, Mao didn't come through Germany and eliminate all the thinkers. Yes, Hitler definitely did his job on a bunch of people, but he really did covet the super intelligent engineer, the creative engineer, the problem solvers, which is why the Nazi military was, quite frankly, until the Americans became the superpowers, if Hitler wasn't stopped, we would be living in a Aryan world covered in swastikas. We would. They would have wiped out the planet had any, especially if we'd all come on board. If we'd all said, "Oh yeah, you know what? Everybody was in blonde hair and blue eyed. Sorry, Hitler, you're going to have to go with your black hair." They would have discompassionately taken over the world, and we wouldn't have Monty Python, the Holy Grail. We wouldn't have all these beautiful right brain creations. But boy, we'd have some serious cars, wouldn't we? Probably have anti-gravity. We'd probably be going to the South Pole constantly, right? This reptilian thing is based on the fact that we think that the people that run the world are like that. They're very, very focused. They're non-emotional people. I mean, I haven't met a bunch of these people, right? But I don't think you need to look much further than, some of the royal families that show up on press engagements to realize that they're very stoic human beings. You don't, and part of it's their expectations. I certainly hope that the Queen of England isn't the thing that we think she is. Isn't the woman that went over and adopted a bunch of kids and they disappeared and is involved with all these satanic rituals. I hope she's not that person. And I hope, in addition to her not being that person, that she actually does, tell a fart joke every once in a while. I mean, something. I mean, I hope she just relaxes every once in a while behind closed doors. We know that Prince Charles did run off with the Python crowd for a little while, make a few little movies of his own, which showed he had a personality, at least for a little while, Again, nobody knows who these people really are. But we know that they have the money and the power and the legislation to keep out of trouble. Meaning if they get themselves into trouble, it's illegal to press charges against them. So then you have a dilemma of, okay, we seem to be told constantly that these aliens that arrive are always 100% communicating with this non-empathetic layer of our world, right? What if they were non-empathetic too? They're like, well, this is our kind of people. They don't have to be interdimensional, beings that possess human beings and possess the consciousness of human beings, but maybe they could be. I hate to even repeat the story, but I did tell a story about, a couple of years ago, I had an experience in this house here that I felt like I was sort of sharing consciousness. I wouldn't say I was possessed, like I couldn't do what I wanted with my body. I definitely was in control of my body, but I felt like I had another consciousness on top of me. And I was feeling no pain, and I was listening to this voice sort of observe my world as a analysis of humanity, and he or she or whatever it was essentially laughing at the fact that we build homes to make ourselves feel safe. And he was giving me visions in my mind. I'll just say he for the lack of a better gender. And the story is that I woke up and I didn't feel any pain that morning. It was like I didn't feel like I was in a moral coil. I feel like I was in this almost utopian state of being. Like it wasn't like high by any means. It wasn't like I felt like I was on morphine. Believe me, I've been on morphine a couple of times in my lifetime, but I didn't feel high at all. I just felt totally at peace with myself and conscious. And I've done a couple of drugs in my lifetime that have never made me feel like this. But I got up and I walked down my hallway, and I'm having these, I stopped at the end of my hallway. It's a midsummer day. It's really warm in my house. I'm totally buck naked, and I'm standing there, and this being is having these kind of observing thoughts to himself. I remember pushing a question at their consciousness, and I said, well, who are you, and where are we, and what about the universe? And, I get a little freaked out when I think about the infinite nature of the universe, right? And this being said, this being was sort of talking to himself the whole time. It's very quick, probably, a couple minutes of conversation to himself. And again, he was showing me visions in my mind, which I would only assume are his visual thoughts. But he made my house look like a cartoon, like one of those caricature maps of Disneyland where everything's a little bit too big and weird, or those maps of New York or London, where buildings are much bigger so you can see them on the map as landmarks to get around, And he essentially made my house look like this caricature of what it really looks like on top of this heliocentric ball, but it was probably, a good, it had probably been about a 3,000 mile wide house, but it was like a funny little caricature in my mind. And I said something about, what about the universe? What is that? Like, where are we? Who are you? What's going on here? It wasn't really a panicky feeling, but it was more like hey, if you're here, could you please give me a perspective on this sort of thing? Without knowing that I was going to get an answer of any kind. And what ended up happening was that the universe became this glass ball. And what the voice really said, and I didn't hear it, I just felt it, right? It simply said, oh, don't worry. Let me show you. Let me show you how wonderful the universe is. For lack of a better word, I don't know if he said universe or not, but this glass ball, which was out of my peripheral vision, suddenly collapses in front of me. And I'm literally looking at these cupboards at the end of my hallway. It's broad daylight, probably, 11 to 1 o'clock in the morning or afternoon, whatever. He said, this is it. He goes, we're all here and we're all together and it's totally cool. Don't worry about it. There's nothing to fear. And he put the whole universe in a perspective that felt tangible and it felt traversable and it felt like you're at all places at all times. So just chill sort of feeling, And, the rest of the story is that I got in the shower and I was washing off myself, looking at my hands. And this, as I'm looking at my hands, this being is like saying, wow, it's been a long time since I've been human. That's sort of the feeling I got. I know it sounds nuts, but I'm telling you, that's what I was experiencing, whether it was a delusion in my own mind or whatever. It was sort of comforting and interesting, right? But I didn't get the cure to cancer as a result of having the experience, right? But if that is any indicator of the consciousness that might be over us or with us or something, I guarantee you there's nothing to fear, But I wouldn't know why that being would be there. I don't know what the deal was, but I could only assume if that really was anything interstellar or interdimensional or alien-based or alien consciousness-based, there's a really good force out there and they don't mean us any harm. And they did have emotion, and they did, because when I asked the question about the universe, I got a compassionate feeling of like, oh, don't worry, boom. And then there was some answers. It was cool. Okay, but to button this up, the real point of this episode is, as you know, I've beat up, the horse is dead now, is that I think that if we really want to ever have communion with an outside race that is potentially superior to us, at least in technology, right? Maybe we make a better chocolate malt than they do, We're going to have to prepare the psyche of man, and we're really going to have to be formal about it. We can't just have a bunch of backyard conversations. We're going to have to really build an institution. I would almost think that this is going to sound ridiculous, but what if you put it into a curriculum of children, a curriculum of school? And of course, some of you have heard all the rumors from von Braun that they plan to use the illusion of space technology to create a fake alien invasion, which would create a new world order. So please, no, I'm not trying to feed that either. How else could you do it? I mean, the only other way would be that we hope that man survives man, that in being scared like sheep constantly to kill everybody for these stupid, ridiculous fictional stories of indoctrination, or just sheer haves and have-nots, or sheer fear that someone's a darker color skin than us, we're going to have to find a way to either we evolve to the point where they're going to show up because we're good to each other and we're ready for them, or we're going to have to take the reins and actually make this a formal discipline within mankind, Thing is, if you're a parent or a grandparent, the little kids ask the UFO question all the time. They ask God questions. They ask alien questions. They eventually get there by watching something on TV. And at that point, when the questions opened up, you have the opportunity to engage the unknown and perhaps lay down a bedding that prepares a new generation of society to chill the F out, And as these little kids go to school and talk to the other kids, you might have created a little virus in the mind of man to be more tolerant of things that are different than us. Why not? Why preach anything else? Why preach this fear of Muslims? Again, we do have Muslims that are doing things that are bad on earth, right? Because they've been indoctrinated and they've been persecuted by the West by bombing the crap out of their worlds to take over their money system. So that's really occurring. So those are other major problems that we need to get to probably first through conversation, through de-indoctrination. Doesn't mean we need to tolerate their immigration into our countries. I'm not for that either. I want America to stay America. I want Mexico to stay Mexico. I want all the countries of the world to stay who they are. I want them to control their populations. I want to travel to their countries. I want to be welcomed with open arms, and I want to welcome them with open arms on a vacation visa or a passport visit. And, on the off chance that our country lacks a particular discipline that they might have, then we may sign up for normal immigration, green card, citizenship and say, look, you're a astrophysicist and we really want to get to the moon. So why don't you come on and we're going to sign you up and you're going to learn everything about America. And over 10 years, you're going to get your citizenship. You're going to be sponsored by companies. They're going to vet those claims of your knowledge by sheer practice. And you're welcome to our country. That's the way immigration is supposed to work. It's the way it does work. The rest of the methods don't work, But again, alien race watches us use slaves around the world to create our products we don't need. What's an alien going to think when they come into our house and say, why do you need that 80-inch television? Does your visual cortex not get the same experience from a 62-inch television or a 42-inch television? Do you really need to post that much on Facebook? Who knows? But let's check ourselves. And I know that some of this is like, some of this is preaching to the choir, but other parts might seem like I'm creating these idealistic views of the world that we're supposed to achieve. Well, if you don't go for at least a big goal in life, you're never going to get the little ones in between. So if you dream small, that's all you're ever going to get. If you dream big, you're going to get big stuff. You think Donald Trump got to where he is by dreaming small? People bust that guy's balls because his father, I think, gave him $40 million to start his real estate empire at a time when $40 million was a lot of money. But then they poo-poo the fact he built it up to $9.5 billion. Oh, that was easy, right? That was easy, right? He was just ushered into all of the success. He never had to work hard to make it happen. It just happened to him, And there are people in this world that have been falling uphill their whole lives, and they're part of these shill organizations that they don't really have the wisdom that they are said to have and that kind of thing. But let's forget those people. Let's give the true due diligence of human development to those who've worked really hard. And you don't have to be worth $9.5 billion to be more intense and more amazing than Donald Trump. There's plenty of people in my hometown that are probably living paycheck to paycheck that, as far as being human beings, are better human beings than Donald. And Donald would probably be the first person to tell you that they were. And we know that they are. Just good human beings. You have Mother Teresa was everything they said she was. She was a person to be revered for her sacrifice of her life, And she lived within a religious construct that helped her become that human being. So there's some value to everything, right? I know you feel me. I got nothing more. If you haven't been to mkultraradio.com, it's the place to get all the arteries of the deep thoughts and our normal show. We are planning on recording shows this week, although I have so many of these in the queue. You probably have heard some of the normal episodes between the time of this recording and the other show. When we do record, I put those on Sunday nights at 5 o'clock, which is our normal time slot for Kyle and I to do our normal talk show. It's way, way different than Deep Thoughts. It's two guys just talking about what's going on in the world. I think it's probably best that we actually put that distance that we have, but we put a little more distance between the shows than we actually want to. But it's hard to talk about politics and not continually repeat all the same stuff. And so we try to keep the shows diverse as we possibly can. We try to do 2 recordings at one sitting. So you might, if you hear, one Sunday, you can pretty much guarantee the next Sunday is covered, and then you might have a gap. But the Deep Thoughts are a completely different charter. And I think we're getting some good consciousness. And man, the conversation on not necessarily Facebook. Facebook is always solid, but our conversation on YouTube is insane. You guys are really participating, and I just want to thank all of you for commenting and being very cordial to each other, even though we completely differ sometimes. Hey man, you're watching, you're thinking, you're contributing your ideas. I'm going to do a part 2 on Flat Earth. I might do a part 2 on a few other things. I think I'm going to do a moon episode completely and just cover some of the anomalies of the moon and sort of pull it back and relate it to other things that we've talked about. I need to do a bit more research. I'm trying to up the quality of these shows in terms of the some of the overlays of what I'm talking about. So if I mention something that a picture might be worth 1,000 words of me talking, I'm going to start overlaying those as much as I possibly can. It does slow down the creation of these shows. And again, I realize I make mistakes on these things all the time. I'm coding something wrong, and I apologize. I do listen to the shows after I make them so that I prepare myself for comments for what they call errata, the mistakes, right? So when you guys come in and say, hey, you got this wrong, I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm very sorry. For those of you brand new, the purpose of this show is just so you guys can open up the conversation to fix this planet. We have to start at the consciousness level. That's the real solution to the problem. I think the order of business is to get your body healthy. So before you see this one, I'm going to re-release a new recording of my cancer episode to fix up a lot of the information there and maybe adjust the tone to match a lot more of the tone of the show. I've got some shows back there where I swore in this show too. I use dirty words in this show. I probably should calm down a little bit, but there's some shows where I think I'm just out of control. So I'm going to probably re-record some of them just to ease them up a little bit, because it's I've sort of evolved with the show. I've evolved with you guys, and that'll continue forever, right? But again, if you made it this far, thanks for watching. I do appreciate all your views. Again, the subscription rate is going through the roof with this flat Earth episode, and I'm all into the science and the fringy theory, so I'm going to start pulling out as many of those as I possibly can. This is one of those shows, hopefully, that'll appeal to those that are sort of on the fringe of where the hell are we? Are there aliens? Let's talk about it, right? Our normal motto of the show is learn the rules that rule you. That really applies to more of the political agendas of the world, but this particular one, well, there's probably some rules about communicating with aliens from another planet. And we need to get that conversation going in a very educated, multidimensional framework. And hopefully this is the beginning for some of you. And it really is honestly a beginning of my own pilgrimage in this. I just wanted to share it with you. So if I can come up with some more observations in this area, some more smoking guns, or some easy low-hanging fruit that might change our paradigm of thinking to get to this destination, I'll make a video about it. Anyway, I want to thank you guys for suggesting ideas. I've had a couple suggestions that I'll probably get to after the airing of this show. One of them is rim cloning that I got off one of the listeners, which I will credit as soon as I make it. But please, just throw things at me. Hopefully the wider the topic, the better, because I do have to at least talk for 1 hour. Otherwise, I won't make the show. But yeah. Take care of yourself and somebody else, and I will see you in the next Deep Thoughts.